Minor housekeeping matter, our next speaker will be January 17th. General Michael Meese, retired U.S. Army, will be speaking about the Defense Department budget, which has a lot of implications for research and other activities related to the internet. But today we're very fortunate to have with us Professor Sanjay Goel from the University of Albany. He is a distinguished engineer. If you fly on a Boeing 777, you're likely flying on engines that were designed by Professor Goel. But he does a lot of other things besides that. He chairs a department at the University of Albany that has a very long name that essentially means anything related to cybersecurity. But I think right now he's also a world-renowned expert on artificial intelligence, and that is why we're gathered here today to learn more about artificial intelligence. I heard Professor Goel speak several weeks ago, and as I was listening to him, it was an extremely clear and easily understood presentation. I was thinking that's exactly what we need in Washington. We need a clear explanation about artificial intelligence. And I think Professor Goel is exactly the person to provide it. So welcome to the Hudson Institute. We look forward to your presentation.
Yes, absolutely. Do you want me to sit, stand?
However you like. We don't. If you like a podium, we have one over here if you like a podium.
No, this is good. I can sit and talk, actually. That's probably better for the audience who's watching online.
Okay.
I have to turn around and see which slide I'm talking from. So I started working in the field of artificial intelligence about more than 2 decades ago. I used that for designing aircraft engines. Right? So the field is not new. The field has started in the 60s. And only very recently that everybody is up in arms about AI. People love it, people hate it, and some people don't know what to do with it at this point. So this whole concept of artificial intelligence and how it relates to human intelligence is very old. People have always wondered what it could be. But it came to pass in early 1960s when Alan Turing defined something to measure artificial intelligence called the Turing test. What he proclaimed is that if there's an intermediary between a machine and a human, and you cannot distinguish between the machine and the human, means that we have a perfectly intelligent human being. Lo and behold, ChatGPT has already passed that. Does that mean it has surpassed human intelligence? We don't know that, right? So this was the Turing test we've already talked about. So if you look at the capacity of the human brain, it is made up of cells called neurons, right? We have got about 86 billion neurons in our brains, 100 billion connections through those neurons, and that's what makes us intelligent, right? So what we have in ChatGPT now is we have 500 billion neurons, right? And probably about 70, 80 million connections. So that's how we are trying to equate the raw computing capacity of the human brain versus that of artificial networks, right? And so it is expected that machines will exceed the capacity of human brains by the year 2030. There are serious implications of that, and we're going to discuss that, right? So if you look at the classically defined artificial intelligence or machine learning, it falls under 3 categories. One is called classification, one is clustering, and the third one is called, you can read it out here. I'm trying to see if you're paying attention, reinforcement learning. So what's the difference between them? About 80 to 90% of all of our machine learning is based on something called classification, right? We give the artificial network some data, which is predefined data. For instance, based on these specific characteristics of a customer, they committed fraud, right? So everybody who has committed fraud, everybody who has not committed fraud is fed into this data, telling people which person committed fraud and which one did not. And the goal of the classifier is then for in the future predict who is going to commit fraud. So that's what classification is. But very often we don't have that kind of tag data. So then we use something called clustering. What clustering does, it basically takes data which is non-tagged and finds natural patterns within the data. I'll give you an example, right? If you have a lot of a disease spreading out, and we have information about the disease spread out based on their geographic location, so we can cluster the data to pinpoint what the spreading patterns of the disease are. So that's where we would use clustering, something like clustering, right? And the third is reinforcement learning, right? That is more based on natural systems. What we do in reinforcement learning is it's typically an agent-based system. We start with a set of rules, and based on how those rules perform, the rules get stronger or the rules get weaker until we have a good set of rules to work on, right? If you look at a lot of natural systems, they work by a set of rules. For instance, if you look at a colony of ants, what happens? A colony of ants, they basically go about their business like nobody else, right? They're able to build bridges, they're able to build rafts. If you kill one ant, nothing happens, the next one takes its place and you can see the same line of ants. Have you ever tried doing that? Nothing changes. Why? Because each ant has a simple set of rules, and every ant follows exactly the same rules, so nothing changes. They just replicate each other's function, right? So these are some agent-based systems occurring naturally. So that's reinforcement learning, where we define a set of rules. How do we come up with these rules? By attenuating or strengthening those rules based on their performance. So this is classical machine learning. So why have things changed recently? I did that 25 years ago. I was not invited to talk in every forum about artificial intelligence. Why now? What has changed? Right? Several things have fundamentally changed. One, about a decade ago, or more than maybe a decade and a half ago, we reached the computing power and the computing capacity and the storage power enough that instead of going for smaller networks, we are able to get much, much deeper networks, which means we're going to get much closer computing capacity similar to the human brain. So those are called the deep neural networks. So before I even go there, let me explain what does a neuron look like. If you look at the bottom, you will see the real neuron cell. It has three components: the main body, which is a decision maker, and then it has a lot of, what is it called, dendrites, where it gets all the inputs, and then an axon, which gets the output from the neuron. What does that mean? Where does it gather all the inputs? Right? If you look at the brain cell, which is a neuron, it gets a lot of sensory input from a variety of places. I'm talking to you means that your brain is getting some sensory inputs. You are watching, you are listening, you are feeling the environment, so all that is sensory inputs. What it is doing is it is activating a set of your cells in your brain which are getting this information. If the information, all the collected stimulus that the cell gets is more than a threshold, it fires, otherwise it does not. That's what a neuron is. It is basically an electric synaptic system where it gets a lot of electrical inputs. If the threshold goes above a level, it fires and activates something else. So that's how this whole network works. And this is how artificial neural networks work. We have created this artificial neuron which gets a lot of inputs from before. And if the sum of all the inputs is greater than a threshold, it fires and activates the next layer. So by building layer after layer, we can create an artificial neural network which is replicating a human brain. So all of the little circles you see, they are basically neurons in your brain which are connected to each other, right? What we are seeing is a fully connected network. Typically that does not happen in the brain, but for ease and for convenience, we use a fully connected network. There are more sophisticated neural networks which are sparse based on, for instance, if you're looking at an image, instead of connecting the whole network, we may be looking at an image in pieces of that and analyzing it separately. So that's how neural networks work. So let's keep going on. So this is the first innovation that happened, which really transformed the neural networks from a sleepy field onto something which can be used commonplace. So the next phase of development came about a decade ago in generative modeling, right? So what I told you before, that you typically need tag data. Somebody committed fraud, somebody did not commit fraud, right? Somebody has high IQ, somebody has low IQ. These are called tag data, right? We have some independent variables, which are the characteristics of the person, a dependent variable, whether or not somebody committed fraud, somebody has high IQ, low IQ. So the problem with this kind of data is that this kind of data is limited, right? We collect the data, we store the data, but this is limited. The next radical transformation came when we stopped needing the use of tagged data, which means we can just take untagged data and use classification based on that, right? Let me give an example. So in case we are trying to teach a computer how to read text, what does it do? It will be able to read the text, and it has nothing to tag it, right? Whether it's good text, bad text, and whatnot. It will be able to find correlations between the words to find out what the location of the word is and how they're related to each other. That's what called is generative modeling. Once they're able to do that, this concept is called attention or self-attention. It is able to focus on certain words, identify the context of certain words mathematically, right? And that has totally transformed what artificial intelligence looks like. We can feed it raw text. Based on the raw text, it can learn from the raw text, it can learn the context, right? I'll give you an example. When you think of an apple, what do you think of? Computer, fruit, right? Apple jam, something else, right? So there is context built into this. So what we can do now is we can understand that context by learning the associations that the word apple has within the text, right? So I'm just giving a simple example, but if you do 1 billion, trillion times over and over again, eventually you start learning. How does a child learn all these things, right? They see an apple, they don't know what it is. Over time, they understand what the apple is. It's meant to be eaten, whatnot. Over time, the neurons are again processing these things. They are told how to do these things. But that's called tag data because the parents are telling, the teachers are telling. What we can do now is it is becoming a self-teacher now, and that's what generative modeling is, right? So the first phase of generative modeling came when we had generative adversarial networks. That was one more smart innovation that people made in neural networks. So instead of using a single neural network, they use 2 neural networks in this case. So one of them would generate fake items. It could be text, it could be audio, it could be video. And the second neural network was evaluating whether or not it can detect whether it is fake or true, right? So when the fake generator first starts, it is very easily detectable what is fake, what is new, right? Because the fake generator, the evaluator has real data which has tagged and untagged data, right? But what happens over time, based on the input it receives from the discriminator or the one that is evaluating the fake generator keeps getting better. It keeps changing its network weights to get better based on how it is writing, right? So over time, this process continues. We train the fake generator, we train the discriminator over and over again. At some point, the discriminator loses its ability to determine whether something coming out of the fake generator is fake or not. At that time, the fake generator is fully trained. It means that the discriminator is no longer able to distinguish between fake and true. And that has been used extensively now in the industry, right? So if you look at all the deep fakes that are coming, I can take Harold's speech and make it appear that you are giving exactly the same speech. You will have the same dialect, same look, same everything. You will even have the features, expressions, anger, sadness, whatever else. And we can do that in our lab now, right? And why is this being used now? A lot of this being used actually for negative purposes, right? For misinformation spread, for spreading pornography images, right? You can basically take somebody else's face and put it on somebody else's body without they even realizing what's going on. So a lot of these things are going on fake. So what we have today is a perfect creation of digital human beings. We can create any skin color, any facial expression, any type of hair, any type of physique. We can create perfect human beings right now using this kind of generative AI, right? So what is missing? What is missing in this perfect human being is the ability to be able to communicate, right? So these are all images and whatnot, and understanding and contextualizing, right? So that's when the next innovation has come in. And the next innovation is the transformer model that I was talking about. What we can do now is we can basically take billions and billions of web pages, any amount of data that we have, and learn from there to build context and teach a computer how to communicate, right? How many of you have used ChatGPT or something similar? So the content is coming out very good, right? So what does that mean? A machine can now understand the context really well. If the machine can understand the context, a machine can build absolutely any type of a human being which looks an exact replica of a real human being. So what do we have here? We have a perfect digital human who can understand language, who can speak language, he can respond to queries, he looks like a human. So where's the difference? Right? So that's where the challenge is, that we have advanced technology so far that we are able to create this. We will be able to create in the future these perfect human beings which can understand, which can replicate what the human beings are doing today. So what are the societal implications of that? We will cover that in a little bit. So I'm going to skip the details of this self-attention. It's too much detail, right? So these large language models that are being created now, they're leveraging all of this to be able to create these perfect human beings. Okay, so right now there's a hype right now. People think it's going to completely change the world, but there's a lot of development still to come. At some point we're going to see advances, then people will get disappointed, and then real progress will actually start. Okay. So there are many large language models. I'm going to do that very, very quickly. The GPT, the BERT, PaLM, Falcon, Lambda, and Galactica, and Llama. What does all these things represent? All major technology players are basically behind one or the other, right? We have OpenAI and Microsoft, we have Google, then we have Facebook, and now IBM is putting their weight behind one of these models. So all of them are getting very, very popular. So I'm going to skip the details of this because you can read that in your own time. Okay. So, but now I get to the real meat of why I'm here. What is the promise of artificial intelligence, right? Most people are still thinking about AI as just replicating what humans are able to do in terms of thinking, in terms of writing and whatnot. But there is one more innovation that is going on in parallel, which people are ignoring, and that combined with artificial intelligence will make a dramatic change in the society, right? Let's look at something as basic as agriculture, right? Today we see a farmer as somebody who goes, plows the field, sows the seeds, reaps it, and sells corn on the field, right? What's going to happen in the future? Your agriculture will be very sensor-based. There will be sensors in the soil to figure out the exact moisture content, how much watering we need to do, how much fertilizer we do, what the quality of the soil is. They will know when to water, they'll know when to, they will be connected to the weather satellites, finding out when it's going to rain, when they need to cover the crops. It is going to become much more productive, but totally controlled by technology, right? Let's go further. Let's look at the Industrial Revolution, right? So we have gone through many, many phases of Industrial Revolution, including robotics and whatnot. What is the next generation of Industrial Revolution look like? The next generation of Industrial Revolution is going to be based on AI. When all of the processes are automated, we need very, very little human interaction, right? So we will have algorithms that control the processes. They'll be able to evaluate the quality. There will be cameras which are actually looking at the whole assembly line, adjusting the assembly lines. So the entire process is going to be automated. So what are the implications of that? If you look at what happened over the last 2 decades, all of the manufacturing moved to low-cost countries, right, where the labor was cheap. It went to China, Indonesia, Mexico, and whatnot. But if you don't need labor, what happens to manufacturing? It comes back to where the source of the customer is, right? So all of that is going to start coming back. So the world is going to get redefined around how the AI is going to transform manufacturing, right? So the new manufacturing is actually, in some ways, bodes well for the supply chains in the Western world because a lot of manufacturing will start coming back, right? It has already started moving out of China. That is for purely political reasons, but people are not realizing that there'll be a lot more movement of manufacturing. So no country will have a hold of manufacturing. Wherever the consumption is, that's where manufacturing will happen because it's all automated factories, right? Let's look at medical advances, right? How many of you have a Fitbit or whatever, an Apple Watch, right? And And right now you use it for what? Tracking basically your basic health application for figuring out how many steps you have, to figure out your fitness levels. But what they are doing today is they're using your physiological data to predict heart attack before it's going to happen, right? So just imagine a person has a watch warning him there's a potential heart attack. He checks himself in a hospital and potentially prevents a heart attack from happening, right? People are producing artificial pancreas with the sensors which will constantly monitor the blood sugar and give dosed insulin amounts rather than people injecting themselves twice a day, right? Probably more efficient than your natural pancreas, which ages over time. And that completely transforms how the healthcare of these patients is managed. Probably they live an as normal life as everybody else lives, right? Without having their arteries and veins, go rogue over time because of all the blood sugar in their blood. So these are the fundamental changes that we're going to see. And now, very recently, we've seen a lot of gene editing techniques are being used to tackle some of the fundamental problems, right? So AI combined with all of these things is a huge potential for, one, changing people's healthcare, but on the negative side, it can also lead to a lot of frivolous, different types of medicines, right? People trying to change their skin tone, people are trying to change their physique, right? Their height, whatnot. Everybody will want to recrisp their genes so that they have better genes than they're looking for. Is that what we want as a society, right? That's something we need to think through. Let's look at transportation, right? So today, how many of you drove into Washington, D.C.? Okay, right? So if there's a self-driving car, look at the change in the quality of your life. Right? You're sitting in the back, working, sipping wine, somebody else is driving you, right? But let's look at the negative side of that. If there's an accident, who's responsible for that? The person who bought the car, the person who's sitting in the car, the person who sold the car, the person who manufactured the car, right? People who are building the roads around you, or people who came in front of your car, who's responsible for that? We don't know these answers. So there are societal implications of all that we do, right? Let's look at some of the other implications. Today, if you have a self-driving car, we are thinking, well, we don't have to drive. But look at the parking implication. The car will drop you and then try to find a parking around, automatic parking. But if there is no parking, what does the car do? It keeps roaming around until it can find parking. If there are 500 cars doing that, suddenly start clogging all the roads. There's no parking, so every car is just roaming around until they can find parking. There is no parking. So what happens? You clog the roads, right? Second, since it's self-driving cars, people don't have to drive. Will it lead to an urban spread? People can live 200 miles away. They don't have to worry. They're still working. Somebody's driving them. So we need to start thinking of the societal implications of this, right? And in terms of, infrastructure, right? Right now we have traffic lights. But if we have self-driving cars, which are automatically driven, do we need traffic lights? Or do we need a router sitting in the middle of an intersection? Was basically exactly finding out where the car is coming, giving each car a specific time interval to go through the intersection. The cars just interweave through each other with almost 6 inches of margin between them, right? That is the future that we're looking for. Everything will be densely packed. You'll basically see masses of cars going by. So that's where the future is looking for. How many of you play computer games? Right now, if you look at none of you play computer games, no fun here. So if you look at computer games, a lot of their imagery is very, very choppy, right? The same kind of image, the same hand movement over time, very, very slowly, right? But what's happening with the generative AI, we are able to generate many, many different landscapes, continuously changing the landscape so that and reacting much better to what a person is doing, right? You can go to a desert landscape, you can go into basically a rainforest and see very, very realistic images. So all that is being done today using generative AI. So the whole gaming industry is going to be totally transformed through generative AI. Well, we've already talked about the nutrition. Today you can ask ChatGPT to give you, make a nutritional profile for you, exactly what exercise profile you should use. If you didn't do it one day, you can go and tell ChatGPT you committed a sin, you did not do the exercise which was recommended, and it'll tell you something else to do everything. So you almost have a buddy with yourself who's constantly guiding you, right? So this is where you can do healthcare and nutrition. So this is for the positive, right? And so a lot of the societal good will come. You will have a lot of mundane tasks automated. You will have self-driving cars, right? And you will have better healthcare, and solving crime is going to be easier, right? So, but all of that comes at a cost. And I'm going to skip this for now. Let's look at the cost of this now. I'm going to come back to that, what it means for education, right? So what is the cost of all this? So let's start with the first thing in terms of the cost, right? So these are some of the challenges we have, right? If you look at the data that is being used to train generative AI, there are a lot of biases in the data. For instance, if 10 years ago, Harvard used to mainly recruit white males for education at Harvard University, and we're using that data to train a model for future selection, what will happen? It will be biased towards that, right? And these biases have already been shown. And in case there's a lot more data in the criminal system about blacks, right, compared to the whites, what will happen when you start using that for looking at recidivism and looking at who is going to commit the crimes? It's going to be more black people just because the data is biased. It's likely to do that. So these are some of the challenges we have. And second, a lot of the people who are creating these models, the AI models, are white and males. Right? So when they train, they don't see any discrimination against women, against minorities, against people of color, people outside the country. So they're not seeing a lot of that, right? It's not that they're consciously trying to do that, but they don't notice any biases that are creeping into the analysis. So we need to worry about that. But there's a huge question of fairness. How do you define this fairness, first of all, right? If you think of fairness, let's think of an admission decision, right? We have about 20 black students and 20 white students apply. What is fair here? That if you have to hire 8 people, right? So should we hire 4 black and 4 white, right? Or should we hire the 8 best people out of those? Or should we hire, because of historic injustices, should we be hiring, what's it called, 5 black and 3 white students? So we don't have this definition of fairness. For AI to come up with a fair judgment of what should happen is impossible, because we don't understand what fairness needs to be. So we need to start thinking about ourselves. What does the future look for in terms of fairness, and how do we articulate these systems to bias them specifically to meet our definition of society, what the society wants? I'm not advocating what they should do. I'm not advocating equality versus equity. I'm just talking from a technology point of view. We need to have a social reckoning. What do we want these AI systems to do? So people are concerned about natural biases. What I'm concerned about is society wants something other than true, honest equality, right? So how do we create these biases? We need to understand that. And how do we quantify this fairness? I'm going to skip that. And how do we ensure this fairness, right? There are many different ways of ensuring fairness. We need to make sure that the data that's being used is correct. We can use counterfactuals. What a counterfactual means is that if an admission decision is made for somebody, let's say he's a white male, if you just change the male to female or white to black, will that change the admission decisions? So these kind of testing can be done on systems. But again, that's not perfect, right? We will still have biases that are coming through. So that's what we mean, right? So statistical parity is intuitive fairness measure, and in a perfect world with equal opportunities, it would be satisfied because it's statistically fair. However, that's not what we want as a society, right? There is affirmative action, all kinds of things. Now, how do we program all these things? There's a recent brouhaha because the paper came out that generative AI is left-leaning, right? So they did the analysis. They basically asked generative AI specific questions about politics, and a lot of the answers they checked statistically, they were left-leaning. Now, why is this happening? Is it because there's a lot more content from the left coming into the media, which is being sucked into these engines? Or is it because the people who are creating these, the technology companies, they are more left-leaning and they're biased towards that? I can tell you, I don't think people look every day and start putting biased information. They're just collecting information and training these things. So how are these biases coming? We don't know the answer to that, right? So yes, we have tested that there are biases, which is more left-leaning, right? we need to try to understand the root cause of these biases, right? And we need to address these things. And that's a part of our future of AI that we need to reckon with. So these are other challenges. The third challenge that I see, or the fourth, I don't know, I've lost count, is generative adversarial networks, right? So we are generating these deep fakes, which are so realistic that it is hard to distinguish them from the real images. So for misinformation that we come in, even right now, a lot of the media that people are consuming, news people are consuming, is coming from social media, right? They go to the social media, and how do you see whether an information is good or not? By looking at the popularity of the news. How many likes does it have? How many dislikes does it have? That has become a latent measure, right? In this kind of a scenario, given generative AI is producing all of this content, how do you even know what is true and what is false anymore, right? So over time, are we going to lose a sense of reality? What the reality is, whatever generative AI is telling us is the truth. So these are serious concerns we have as society, right? Already there's a lot of propaganda. People really don't understand the news, right? When I hear a news that 88% of the Russian forces have been demolished, and yet they're still winning, or at least holding steady in the war, it almost seems unbelievable. If 88% of their forces are dead, they should have lost by now, right? So a lot of these news media are coming out, they are biased to influence political opinion during specific times. Why now? Because they need to pass the funding bill for Zelensky, right? So come out with the news, 88% of the Russians are dead. They're not. I mean, if the 88% were dead, then Russia would not be standing in Ukraine right now, right? And so this just lack of credibility in a lot of things that are coming in. Maybe for a small type of soldier, 88% died. That doesn't mean that they have lost 88% of their capability. But spinning this news, and a lot of this is going to happen with social media. So if you look at the image in the top and the bottom, what do you see? The top is a perfectly nice city, right? And the bottom is a totally war-ravaged city, right? A city block. Where do you think the top picture was taken? Huh? No, the top picture? I'm getting there. You're trying to prove my point here. The top picture is the Back Bay Area in Boston, right? And what's the bottom picture? Right. It looks like it's from Palestine, but it's the same Back Bay Area gone through generative AI to create a destructive image of the same Back Bay Area. So people can now generate these realistic fakes and use them for propaganda, in the Middle East and whatnot, to show the destruction that is happening around the place. I'm not saying a lot of it is not true, but I've seen a lot of fake imagery being used for soliciting donation and fundraising coming out by creating these fake images. So these are the kind of challenges that we face. Most people would think this is a war-ravaged Palestine or Gaza right now, right? It's a Back Bay Area and generated through our generative adversarial networks. So you take a picture of Aleppo, combine it with the Back Bay city of Boston, and suddenly you get a war-ravaged picture, which is coming down. So these are the capabilities that we have today. So another issue is privacy, right? You do a lot of searches on the web. You go on the web, you have a lot of information on the web. Lo and behold, all that information is now in ChatGPT. Did you want that information to be on ChatGPT? Did they ask you about it? Right? Inadvertently, you probably pressed a button somewhere that you're willing to share your information with everybody in the world, because that's what happens when you're trying to access a website. You don't care. You need the information. You press a button, and suddenly your information is gone. And you know where it comes back? ChatGPT, right? So a lot of these people think that the artificial intelligence networks that we are creating, they're black boxes. Once the information goes in, nobody can see. But there are ways to decipher information about yourself, right? And so there's a loss of privacy now that you start to see when we are trying to take all of your information and translating them into these engines. And another challenge that we see is coherence, right? So what ChatGPT has done, it's basically conquered the entire learning encyclopedia, right? It knows everything, but it's a huge search space. How do we know where it is accurate and where it is not? Once people start believing it, they will feel everything in it is accurate. But we have tested it out. There are a lot of places where it gives total garbage, incoherent statements, right? So it's not ChatGPT's fault. I mean, wherever the data is sparse for training, wherever there are weaknesses in its training, it is going to give incoherent or incomplete results or inaccurate results. Wherever the data is false, it's going to give. Who is going to test that? Who is going to audit that? Can you audit it? No, right? The companies which are actually producing these, they are the only ones who really have the capacity to audit them on a large scale. And so if you're the judge, jury, and executioner, I think we are basically living by whatever dictum is coming. So the future of information is going to be governed by technology companies, and we'll have to believe them. Okay, so now I can generate music from ChatGPT that is very similar to Billy Joel, that looks almost identical to Taylor Swift, right? Or I can blend two musicians' voices and music styles together and create music. Now, I created that music using ChatGPT. Am I the author of that music? Do I have the copyright on that? Does the copyright belong to ChatGPT, which actually produced it? Or does the copyright belong to the original authors from which it was derived? Do you have the answers to that? Where does the copyright lie, right? A lot of what you're getting out of ChatGPT in writing, essays and whatnot, is derived from a lot of previous work. But the copyright is unclear. The copyright law was created to protect the artists, right? To make sure that the artists keep innovating. If ChatGPT is able to do everything, right? They can create better art than humans. They can create these synthesized voices, and they can do it at a much larger scale, much more efficiently. Where do you think the copyright laws go? Do we need to change the copyright law in a way that people still have incentive to produce art, produce music? We don't know the answer to that. Right, so this gentleman produced basically in a news article an interview with a purported race car driver, right? And the interview never happened. It came out of ChatGPT. And nobody knew it until the person who was claimed to have given this interview came forward and said, I never gave this interview. Until that it went undiscovered. And eventually the editor was fired for that, but that's how it happened, right? So this is becoming real. People are leveraging this for things that they should not. And so let's look at another dystopian threat here, right? Surveillance. So every square inch of a lot of the cities is under some kind of a camera, right? So what happened in the past is that you would have all the footage, it'll get stored. Only when there is a crime, there's an accident, that somebody will pull the footage out. Over time, it just got replaced by some other footage, right? So nobody actually saw that. What's happening now with artificial intelligence? We can actually analyze that footage in real time, which means we're constantly looking at pictures, what is happening. So the privacy that you had is gone. We are under constant surveillance, right? So with AI, you can basically look at all of the images. And if you have identity associated with all the people, if you have a database of all the people with their identity images and what they look like, you can be constantly surveilling everybody on this earth all the time. Do you want to be surveilled like that all the time? Right? Where does the privacy go in that, right? So these are the challenges that we're facing today. So one of the biggest ethical qualms I have is these killer drones. So today you can program a killer drone to basically identify a specific type of people, specific objects, and go and actually shoot and kill and destroy. For the first time in the history of mankind, we are leaving a decision whether a person should live or die to a machine. If it makes a mistake, it's a machine's mistake, right? Do we want to leave that choice to machines? Even if it's during war or whatever else. Tomorrow, I can program a drone and leave it over San Francisco to go and shoot somebody I don't like. Technology is there. People are going to exploit it. People are going to use it. So where do we stop with these kind of technologies? So the other thing that we need to worry about is, right, we are thinking of artificial AI as a perfect beings. Once we create this system, they are fine. But there are a lot of different ways we can do. We can, just by changing, these are very fragile systems. The role of an AI model is basically to exploit every inefficiency in the data to try to have as much accuracy as possible, right? It is not looking at the context. So what's happening in this case is by changing small inputs into the data, we can fool the system into believing something else. A stop sign can turn into a green light, a panda can turn into a gibbon, so that's one of the attacks. The other attack is a poisoning attack, right? You change the data that is going in, and poison the data that's going into the networks or into the models, and you can again fool it into believing it. For instance, ChatGPT is left-leaning. Why? Because the data that is going in, I'm not saying it is poison, but the data is making the difference, right? Because the data may be left-leaning. So people can actually deliberately try to create these things which are left-leaning, which are right-leaning, right? A lot of people are concerned about left-leaning language models. Maybe they'll start their own company to create a right-leaning language model run by Fox News versus NBC and whatever else, right? We've always been on this war. And so the other thing that's happening is the hacking efficiency has gone up. Today, if you see a big barrier, which a lot of the hackers in the Far East or in Eastern Europe, they have a language barrier, right? So they cannot write well, they cannot contextualize it well enough. But with generative AI, they're certainly very powerful. Now they're using your individual information to create context-dependent phishing emails, right? They will say your brother X, Y, and Z. They will have the name, they will have all of the information, your address, and sending you context-dependent, and people are believing them. So they're getting much more potent, right? So that's another challenge that we face. So then there are more dystopian threats. Okay. So let's take a scenario where artificial intelligence gets smarter and smarter and smarter, right? Tomorrow you have a choice. You can hire a digital human or a real human. Cost of a digital human, $500. Real human, $50,000. They can work more efficiently. They can work longer hours. They can take all the abuse. They have more information. They're more accurate. They're easy to change, easy to inform further. Who would you take? As a company executive, right? So what happens then? If more and more of the workforce is replaced by digital humans, what's going to happen over time? People will have less and less incentive to work hard, to study, to basically learn new skills. So does that make a lot of the humans useless in society? Right? When all the work is getting done, all the intellectual work is getting done by digital humans, what will we be relegated to? Just doing physical labor, being nannies, being plumbers, being carpenters and whatnot? We need to start thinking of those implications, right? As a corollary to that, who controls AI? Maybe 5 companies? Will they control the whole world? Will they control who works, who does not work, what work they need? So suddenly the status of human beings, the governments changes, right? It's the technology companies which are basically deciding what the society looks like in the future. Second, right now we have about a dozen artists who are on the top of the charts, right? Tomorrow, do you think AI-generated art, AI-generated music will be at the top of the charts? Right? Because AI is so prolific, it can constantly keep generating. It can even create avatars, like we have Taylor Swift, we can have, Sanjay Swift or whatever else, singing all the music, right? So they can create these avatars, they can create all the music, they can be shipping it out, they can be promoting the music as well, because AI has the capability of doing all of that. What does it do to our artists? We touched on that before, but I wanted to make this point even more explicit. So the creativity that we have as humans, if that's replicated by AI, although we are just doing it by copying what the artists have done in the past, but again, we will not know any difference. The future generations will not know any difference. Maybe it will be even smart enough to create variations of those into music. So the creativity will become harder, right? So 30% of all jobs by 2030, according to McKinsey, will be automated by AI or other automation tools. 30% is a big number. So 1 in 3 jobs go away, right? That's exactly what I mean when I say that we need to start looking for training ourselves to do physical labor, right? Because the intellectual jobs are going to get taken over. All the manufacturing jobs are going to go. I'm taking an extreme dystopian scenario there, right? So take it with a grain of salt. But that's where the dystopian threats are. that we need to start re-reckoning the society in terms of where we go with this generative AI. So that leads to two important things, right? What is the future of education? And how do we audit this AI? So I'm going to go to the future of education first. So when generative AI came in, I'm the chair of the department, so all the faculty came, oh my God, we need to ban it for our students. They're going to go and get all their work done by generative AI. Then, how do we evaluate them and whatnot? And you know what my response was? That the genie is out of the bottle. It's never going back in. People said the same thing when Google first came out. Well, then everybody's going to use Google to do everything. We are still here. We are still educating. We need to change the way we educate our students, right? We need to change the way in which we evaluate or assess our students. What I've already done, instead of giving them a lot of essay writing assignments, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm giving them deep thinking assignments. I'm taking more oral exams. I'm making them actually present in class and do things which they would not do before, right? So what we need to do as educators, we need to change the future of learning, leveraging generative AI rather than running away from it, right? What is the biggest limitation instructors have today or teachers have today? They cannot spend enough time talking one-on-one to the students. So why not take a lot of the mundane tasks and let generative AI do that, for instance, preparing lesson plans, communicating with the students and whatnot, and then work one-on-one, be more creative. So we need to transform ourselves to leverage that rather than complain about it. So that's what we need to do. We need to create specific digital assistants. For instance, if I have a question in the middle of the night, I know I cannot reach my professor, right? So if I had a digital assistant where I can go for the answers, I'll be much better served because I get immediate answers, immediate responses, much better for education, right? So if you look at 50% of the work which the educators do is for mundane tasks. This is for our school teachers. If they put that all to AI, which is automatable, what will happen to the quality of teaching? It'll certainly get better. So again, this is not a detriment. This is actually better for education. Third, so one of the things that we need to do as educators, I have to bring this up because I'm an educator, right, is look at the global trends. And I'm going to discuss that a little bit further down as well. So what we see in terms of global trends is that US is today the #1 country leading technology, especially in AI. I'm going to show you a chart later on. However, where we are falling behind is in training in high-tech areas, right? If you look at the US is right somewhere in the below the half. China is way up there. India is way up there, right? So US is falling behind in the training the technology professional that we need today to run this economy. So what do we need to do? We don't have 1.4 billion people or 1.3 billion people like China and India, right? So what do we need to do? We need to tap into our adult population, right? We need to start working on this adult population, people who are office workers, people going and retrain them into doing some of this more intellectual work. See, one of the things people realize that, well, I'm no longer 24, so I cannot think as well. That's a myth. Your brain cells have so much extra capacity, you can be as sharp as you were 18 all the way until you're in the mid-70s because you have enough gray cells in your brain to do it. We just stop training ourselves, we stop learning, we stop becoming curious, right? We basically get too bogged down with too much mundane details, which, by the way, generative AI can do. So we need to refocus our workforce, retrain them into doing that, right? So that's something we need to start working on. How do we do that? How do we keep our workforce sharp all the way through? And obviously excessive drinking will do that too, but that goes without saying. All right, I'm going to go back to another issue. Oh my God. How much time do I have?
You're fine. You're fine.
All right. So one of the things that we need to start thinking about is, right, how do we audit AI? Like I said, large language models, even they are so huge attack surface or huge search surface. We don't know how we're going to test it, right? But we need to test it for everything. So today, everything that we have, all the accounting firms, they do a lot of auditing work. They look at financial statements, look at your information systems, everything. But they don't know how to audit AI systems. So this is not a typical audit where you get the final system and you suddenly test whether it works or not, right? Auditing AI goes through the entire life cycle. You need to audit the data. You need to audit the people who are actually developed the algorithms, what algorithms were used, how they were used, how the training was done, how long the training was done. And then you even test, do some counterfactual testing. So auditing AI is going to become a huge, huge, huge task. Like I said, if there's a car accident, right? What happens? Who's responsible? Some AI system somewhere malfunction, right? So who's going to audit that? So all of this auditing work is going to take complete transformation. While the traditional audits that we do in the Big Four accounting firms and whatnot, a lot of it will get automated because it's a lot of mundane checklists and whatnot. There's a new class of auditing that needs to come in, which is auditing AI systems, and that's what's going to grow like wildfire. If anybody has a need for a professional growth area, auditing AI is probably one of those because this is catching on like wildfire. We don't have enough talent, and the demand is going to keep going up. Right? So a lot of different cases where AI has already malfunctioned, right? I mean, basically created discrimination for people who are getting health care. It has basically discrimination in the court system. So all that needs to be audited, right? So the reason I'm talking about this is our research. We are looking at how to best audit AI systems. So we have come up with these 5 different areas in which we need to audit AI systems, which is the training data, data process and governance, model commission and development, model process and governance, and the people who are actually developing it, right? So we have come up with all the details by thorough interviews and by doing some empirical work. And next, the auditors that we have today, they are completely incapable, not completely, vastly incapable of auditing AI systems. So they need to get retrained. So again, a retraining mission here, right? And so that's one of the key needs that we have as a society. How do we audit these systems, right? So let's take it at a higher level now, right? What happens at the national level? Today, there is a massive race going on in the area of AI, right? So the country which is number 1 right now by a large margin is the United States. And ChatGPT and all of the other generative AI is one of the reasons why it is number 1. A distant second is China, right? If you look at it, distant second is China. So if you're at 100, China is at 68. So there's a huge gap going on right now between China and the United States. But to be able to maintain, and there's a race going on. I mean, obviously China wants to win the race, right? And EU is also trying to win the race, but they are nowhere even close. So they're not going to go. So the big race is right now going on between India and China. So why is this going to change? Because of what I said earlier. Whoever can control AI can control society, can control manufacturing, can control all aspects of the future world governance. So that's where the big race is going on in terms of AI. So why is that becoming a huge issue in terms of the competitiveness, right? So right now, if you look at the United States, we don't outcompete any other country in terms of labor. We don't outcompete any other country in terms of manufacturing. We only outcompete the rest of the world in one thing, which is innovation. We out-innovate almost everybody else in the world many, many folds. And that's the reason we stay the number 1 economy. If you look at a lot of the innovation that come in, they're all coming through this whole infrastructure, but other countries are trying to compete. China is trying to compete. India is trying to compete, right? And so this competitiveness is going on. So what do we need to remain the number 1 technology firm or the country in the world in terms of economic growth, economic prosperity? We need to be able to sustain this development. And how does this happen? Through investments. We get the most private sector investment in AI in the United States by a large margin, right? We get the largest government sector investment coming in AI right now in the United States. But what is different? 5 years ago, most of the AI patents were filed in the United States. Today, where are most of the patents being filed? China, by a margin of 3-1, right? So the world is trying to catch up now. There's a patent and there's a high quality patent. The quality of patents being filed in China are not that good, right? They're a lot of them are trivial. But again, there's a huge drive, a huge push by other countries to innovate in this area, right? Right? And so what is happening is there is a lot of push also to regulate AI, right? I mean, EU has just passed the AI Act to regulate AI. There's a push in the United States to basically regulate AI. If you look at Sam Altman, he was ousted for the firm because there was a division within the firm. One part wanted to control AI more and the other part wanted to go further out and expand its horizons, right? So this debate is going on. So my thought is different, right? I don't think we should regulate AI as the number one country in the world. Why would you want to put handcuffs on our own self by regulating AI and stopping its development? Do you think any other country will do that? The answer is no. So being a number one economy in the world, being the number one AI driver in the world, it behooves us to let us continue with the innovation with unfettered. Yes, we don't want societal harm, right? If there are biases and whatnot, we find ways to address them, we find ways to solve them. But legislating AI, trying to slow down, one of the basic founders of AI from Google, he came back and said, well, we should put a pause for 6 months, right? What happens when we put a pause for 6 months? Right now, China is 62, we are at 100. China suddenly goes to 82 and we fall back to 95, right? So we don't want that to happen. So I think we need to take some pragmatism when we are in national competitiveness, when we're trying to look at AI, instead of trying to over-regulate it. My personal view is that we need to let it grow unfettered until we reach a plateau when we're not going any further. And that's when we need to start thinking of regulating it. There is also a lot of activity going on in terms of international cooperation in AI, right? Several bodies, OECD, GPAI, and TTC, they're all looking at trying to find cooperation in AI. But I think the competitiveness is so strong right now, I don't see any meaningful collaboration that's going on. Yes, we will all agree to some norms and whatnot, but those are unenforceable norms. So I think that's the next step in terms of international cooperation is developing some norms around it rather than trying to regulate it around the world. That's not going to happen. So another thing which I would like to advocate now is that something called lifelong learning. Whatever you learn today in schools will probably be obsolete in 3 years, maybe 5 years, right? So the whole concept of education that we have here, we study for the first 21 years of life or 24 years of life, whatever it is, and then we just work. That's gone. Because the technology is changing so fast, learning is changing so fast, the work environment is changing so fast. We need to get into lifelong learning, right? So that's the concept which I've been promoting. What does lifelong learning means? That we need to constantly keep re-educating ourselves. So every time, 4 days of work and 1 day of basically learning. We need to change the student mindset to make sure that learning is never finished. They need to constantly keep learning if they want to survive the workplace. Because if you don't do it in the United States, people elsewhere will catch up with you. So that's what I mean, that we need to start focusing again on adult education. We need to change the corporate mindset again. And they need to give basically people time to study and learn. One of the things I recommend is something called Learning Fridays, right? You work for 4 days, and the 5th day you use just for educating yourself. You go in, you take classes, do whatever else you want. If you don't have the 80-20 ratio in work and learning new things, as a workforce, we will start falling behind the rest of the world. Because other parts of the world, they can keep generating newer and newer people coming out. We can't that fast, right? So we need to do that. Oh, that's it. That's the conclusion, right? So in another few years, we will have computers with AI which is much stronger than the human mind. Today, ChatGPT, right, with fewer neurons and fewer connections has us. How many of you have more knowledge than ChatGPT today? Anyone? Not me. So that's where the future is going. So we will have more and more powerful machines. It is going to transform the world, the way we think, the way we write, the way we do art, the way we do manufacturing, the way we do design. Everything is going to change. There are a lot of threats, but the promise is great too. It's going to solve a lot of problems. a lot of healthcare issues are going to be solved, right? It'll improve the quality of life. So people may think that the harms are better than benefits and whatnot, but that's besides the point. Once this technology is out, it's never going back. People are going to continue to leverage it. So we just need to understand what the harms are, what the negative impacts are, try to address them as best as we can as we move on in society. That's all I had. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Wow, that's great. Let me open it up to the floor for questions. And I don't know if we have any online questions as well. So, and if not, I will open up. We have a question up here in the front.
Excellent presentation, but we put the humans as sort of the center, and we tolerate stupid humans very well. And the algorithm, as you point out, can help stupid humans and can refine not so stupid humans to get better. But when they come together, I was in a meeting earlier this week where we talked about truth in media, and that these algorithms would bring us back to Walter Cronkite. And the stupid humans are unable to tell the difference between news and opinion shows, and they ingest it all, but they've lost the filters over a short number of decades. And so the algorithm's going to ingest it all and may actually do better filters than the humans do.
True. First of all, I would not call any human stupid. They're all bright, brilliant people. I would never do that.
That's educated.
Yeah. Well, I think there are people.
That's critical thinking.
Right. So, but let's look at it a little bit differently, right? So we have people who are brighter than others. People take a pride in how smart they are, how bright they are. But if everybody has a digital assistant who's smarter than they are, no matter how bright you are, does it matter how bright you are anymore? Because you have digital assistants who are smarter than everybody, you can leverage that for everything else. So the advantage that people who are brighter have today, maybe it'll disappear because we have these machines which are smarter, which you run around like you in an alternate brain you're walking around with. That's what's going to happen, right? And my dystopian thought is that all nonsense will come out of these generative AI models, and we will still believe that, right? That's the biggest thing, because it's generating such realistic information that stupid or intelligent, it's very difficult to basically distinguish between the two. Right?
All right, Professor, thank you for joining us today. I'd like to know your perspective on the future of the human body. A lot of futurists have talked about how human biology has mainly stayed the same for hundreds of thousands of years. But now we're kind of moving into the territory where we're able to augment our bodies mechanically, and with these sort of biotech innovations, where do you see the future of the human body in the 21st century? And do you think, there's going to be societal implications with, people worried about agency over their own bodies?
Okay, so that's a thought-provoking question. What's going to happen to the human body? Well, let's look at it two ways: inside the body and outside the body, right? So right now, the techniques for gene editing are getting more and more refined, right? So if you look at inside the body, we will have gene editing techniques which will be able to cure people of diseases which are basically based on metabolic pathways, right? Because right now, a lot of the diseases, a lot of mental diseases, a lot of diabetes and whatnot are based on somewhere the metabolic pathways go wrong. If you can edit the genes to be able to fix that, that's a good thing that's going to happen. But the same editing techniques can be used to enhance the body, right? It can change your skin color. If you're bald, you can suddenly not be bald, right? So a lot of things can happen by changing the genes in your body. And at what stage you start changing your genes, whether you're a child, whether you're an adult, this is an unstudied science. But right now, recently there was an approval for basically using gene editing for some disease propagation. So that's a positive side, that we can do diseases. But on the other hand, if everybody starts to edit their internal genes to look differently, right? Now that's the problem. Then what happens to society? The reason we survive as a human race is because of the diversity. If everybody has exactly the same gene set, what happens if there's a disease which attacks a specific type of a human being? The whole society will vanish. So that's the inside. Now, the second part of the question you asked, right? So we will have robotics and other kinds of enhancements people will be using to enhance their body. But people are always using pectoral implants and breast implants and whatnot to make themselves look better. I don't think there is any stopping that. People have vanity, people have needs. And will I do it to my body? Absolutely not. I'm happy with the way I am. But people will do it? Yes. Should we regulate that? In some ways, so that people are not unnecessarily harming themselves. I think there needs to be some regulation of that so that unscrupulous elements in the medical profession are not exploiting people based on that. People understand the harms of that. But again, if a technology is out there, people are going to use that if they think it is good for them. We just need to make sure that not enough harm is coming to people, or not any harm is coming to people based on what they're doing. Right? If today people use breast implants, even if it can harm them because, again, they want to look better. People using pectoral implants. People are using butt implants. Why? Vanity, right? So I think the same thing will continue, even with this robotics and prosthetics and whatnot. Now, do I want a titanium arm just like in Star Wars or something so that I can slash and burn through everything? The answer is no. But somebody may want that. Who knows? So government can only regulate as much, right? And in the end, it's what people want in society. Any other question?
Yes, I was wondering if you knew of anyone doing research that lays down a basic set of virtues to build AI decision-making products on, like Bill Bennett's book, Virtues, and I think Isaac Asimov, in one of his stories, had 3 basic premises that computer robots ran on.
So I think there's a lot of work going on in the ethics behind AI, not only in the university setting, but also in a lot of think tanks. Right? There's a lot of work going on in EU, how to control this technology. They've just passed the EU AI Act. I believe they've reached a compromise. I'm not sure if it finally passed or not, but they're trying to reduce the harm while continuing to make progress in technology. I don't know how they will do that, but that's something. NIST is coming up with certain standards to basically regulate or to evaluate AI, to audit AI. So a lot of think tanks, a lot of organizations are starting to look at it. Even internally in a lot of these companies like OpenAI and whatnot, the discussions are going on how to basically control the progress in these things. So if somebody writing a book similar to what Isaac Asimov wrote, I don't know that, but I can find that out. It should not be that hard to figure out who's working on that.
As governments and education in the science field don't always work in tandem together well, and given that humans are extremely incentive-based, what would you suggest, or what have you all discussed perhaps, for local, state, and federal governments in order to incentivize the fact that we have a slower age population as opposed to our competitors in China and India, something like a subsidized adult learning program or a tax write-off for a 4-day week? Like, what would you suggest to governments in order to protect against not just regulation, but pushing us in an area of innovation?
That's a great question, and it's right, takes to my heart because I'm an educator. I think what's happening is a lot of the people in state, local, and government organizations, they start feeling that they're not intellectually capable of doing a lot of things. So whenever there is a shortage of talent in the state, you know what or in any local state government, what do? They run for consultants, right? Where they have a perfectly wonderful set of core sitting within the organization that can do the same job because they're not trained that well. So I just had a meeting with New York State executives yesterday morning, right? And I proposed exactly the same thing, Learning Fridays, that every Friday we will open up all of the labs to state employees. They will take classes in the morning, finish their assignments, group work in the afternoon, and spend the whole day learning and working on problems which they bring with them from their work. We need to make drastic changes to the way we are educating our population, the way we are treating our adult workforce. There is no reason for the workforce that we have today for our adult population to not be as sharp as some of the students which are coming out right now from schools and colleges. We can do that. We need to engage in continuous learning. That's what I'm advocating for. That look, we need to create incentive structures for them. We need two things: encouragement, right, changing their mindset, creating the incentive structure, and finding compensation for all of the cost of the education. One of the things we need to realize that when you are 24 versus when you are 44, there's a difference in your lifestyle. You have family, you have kids, you have responsibilities. So instead of asking them to go home and study, we need to find them work time where they actually study. And they need to be evaluated like regular students, right? Incentives. That's what I would think.
Well, on that note about continuous learning, we'll do continuous learning about artificial intelligence after this seminar. Please join me in thanking Professor Goel for a wonderful presentation.
Thanks very much.